I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. With us, a geopolitical and financial analyst, big Wall Street experience. He's been involved in Fortune 500 companies. He's been deeply involved in trading. He is back by popular demand. A lot of people want him to come back on. It's Warren Pollock. Warren Pollock, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Great, good to be here, Greg.
We got lots to talk about. Facebook. We want to talk about that. We want to talk about data or the narrowing that you talked about. In the pre-interview, we'll talk about that, about basically the grab for money in every community across America. But I want to start with Syria, and you told me in the pre-interview that it wasn't much in the past. You said China was the big gorilla, and you said the Middle East not so much, not right now anyway. But what do you think about what's going on in Syria?
Well, I think it's entertainment. It's a kabuki theater. I mean, certainly at the local level, it could be a skirmish. But they have this fellow Assad, who was the poster boy on 60 Minutes about 2 decades ago, and they said what a wonderful guy he was. And now he is the arch enemy of evil, along with Vladimir Putin, who is running a kleptocracy, obviously, but at least it's more honest than we are, because our kleptocracy doesn't have the integrity to tell us exactly what it is and what our form of government is. And we know who Vladimir Putin is. We know what their government is. And if he wasn't a strong man, it would be a total disaster in Russia. It's what's necessary to keep that place controlled. And unlike our form of governance, Russia at least has a 25-year horizon into their future, where we have nothing but competing interests and competing bureaucracies. So we're a kleptocracy just like Russia, but the organs of our state are narrowed. They're basically failing. The press has failed. It's a failed organ of our society. Our governance has failed. It's a failed organ of our society. And people are running around within this very narrowed context. And we are criticizing someone that actually has a strategic view and who is advocating for his own country in a coordinated type of way. And this also includes the expression of Russia on the international stage, something that the United States is very adept at doing, putting its military in other people's business all across the world, deployed all across the world without any strategic objective whatsoever, supporting the military-industrial complex, a great bureaucracy that is enriching lots of people and making us all poor as we spend billions and trillions of dollars on defense, a word which doesn't mean defense at all. It's not defense, it's just chaos, frankly. So we need to be involved in every chaos point around the world, lest we fail to be the superpower that we failed to be long ago.
What happens with Trump? I mean, Trump was part of the kabuki theater. He obviously didn't want to have World War III. He's got a huge job. He's trying to drain the swamp. A lot of people are quitting and moving on. Paul Ryan, one of the latest big high-profile names, say, yeah, I don't want my private jet to fly me out to Wisconsin every week and only spend 150 days at work. But anyway, what do you think about what's going on in Washington right now?
Well, I think the tariffs were a good thing, but I also think that he's being handed policy points that he should follow by all sorts of interests that happen to get his ear from time to time. Syria is an example of that. Someone within the great bureaucracy goes to Trump and says, here's 5 choices in Syria. Which one do you want to pick? And then he says, well, I don't like any of them. And they say, well, you have to pick one. So he picks a choice. You might as well just use a dartboard. But his entire presidency is a kabuki theater. Congress is a kabuki theater. The Senate is a kabuki theater. Your local government is a kabuki theater. And these are just what I would call a veneer. This is the veneer of governance. It's not the real government that's in this country. And our government has some of the elements of the Soviet system. It has some elements of sort of interlaced bureaucracies of, as Chris Hedges would say, inverted totalitarianism. It's really very hard to define our series of government and, our arrangement of government. I think Taleb talked about the fact that we sort of behave as termites. And that's maybe a good way to describe the American system, where we're all moving around building a giant termite mound without an overview of any kind, and each little insect is trying to grab the biggest piece of pie that it can. And right now, there's no one to bench check what our system of governance does and is capable of. And why don't we include in the pie not only local government, not only state government, but also corporations, and then add Silicon Valley to the mix, and then add Wall Street to the mix, and then add in the healthcare industrial complex to the mix, and then add in the legal complex to the list. And when you add all that soup together, all of those little elements together, that's the form of government that we're living under. It is these interlaced and overlapping bureaucracies, and there's a coordination between public sector and private sector. There's an abrogation or a total blindness to law, to tradition, and we're now living in a country where this bureaucracy is involved in doing a disservice to the people that actually live here. And at the top levels, people can get greatly enriched by running one of these bureaucracies, either in Silicon Valley and Wall Street. Even your people in the federal government are enriching themselves. The lower level criminals in local government, one or two who have been indicted in New York State, try to enrich themselves to the tune of six figures. But our quote leaders in Washington enrich themselves to the seven figures, sort of the generals, so the people at in large defense contractors, so the people in Amazon, the venture capitalists in Silicon Valley, and the rules don't apply to them, but the structure of the bureaucracy applies to you and me. And we have a society now that's staff heavy, even in light of technology. And our government, what we think of as our government, the voting booth, that's just a veneer. That's just to keep the people placated. And this bureaucracy, I think, is a major vector of theft. And when we look at the actual functioning of our system, it's atrophied. The press doesn't exist. It used to be that businesses were accountable on social networking. You could say, I didn't like how this and this vendor worked with me. Now you're just banned. And there's a great narrowing. In YouTube, you see it. In the stock market, you see it. In the press, you see this narrowing, and the issues are boiled down to one or two choices. And guess what? People are more comfortable when they're given one or two choices. They would choose something that's consistently mediocre and known versus something that could be excellent but is unknown. And that's the culture that we live in. And a lot of things in our society are a total veneer. What if I said to you that every white-collar worker in the United States, most of them, with few exceptions, are really factory workers, and they're in place just because, for reasons. They have a job just for reasons. Everyone in your school system, everyone in your Fortune 500 company. I mean, these companies can be run on very few individuals, and they're run with these massive enterprises in this sort of I'll scratch your back, you'll scratch my back type of relationship. A Warren Buffett company is an example of that. Insurance carrier, where they could just add in staff. A hospital that scores its bill based on how many people see you, no matter how useless they are to your treatment. So when you look at the growth of the medical sector, this is the great welfare program of today. When you look at the civil service sector, it's a great welfare program today. But when you look at private industry, that's also the great welfare program of today. And now what's very interesting to me is domestically, there is no thread of the free market still existing. It's just one of these harken back to the good old days, the same thing that we live in a republic. It's totally off the mark in terms of where we are. And this is all part of what I'm going to call the great narrowing. Is a great narrowing of outlook in the United States. You see it everywhere in the stock market where there's only 20 stocks in every single fund. You see it on YouTube where there's less and less people that are broadcasting to you and giving you information. You see it in the press where one or two companies govern all the news. You see it in these large institutions like Amazon or Netflix that are controlling the gates into your household and that are acquiring data from every orifice of your existence.
Christine, how does this end? Christine Lagarde of the IMF is out saying that the risk is to the downside. The party's over, basically. What happens when the party is over and we're stuck with a bunch of mediocre kleptocrats that can't steal anymore?
Well, that's where you are today. I mean, we're at the point of, I wouldn't say we're at the point of refusal because people don't know how to refuse. It takes a lot of effort to refuse a bureaucracy, and it could be very detrimental to refuse a bureaucracy. Let's say you get $1,000 speeding ticket. What's your odds of actually going to court and fighting that speeding ticket? What's your odds? About zero. What's your odds of let's say, getting a $100,000 medical bill and turning that around? Yeah, these things can be done. You could fight these bureaucracies, but best not to be in that kind of fight. And what's very interesting is these bureaucracies are serving their needs, and they're not serving your needs. It's a disservice economy. It's not a service economy. It's a disservice economy. And we're at the point not of refusal because people don't know how to refuse. We're at the point where people just simply can't pay the demands that are being placed on them. And people are absorbing the noise. I spoke to a deli owner recently, and he said, well, what do you think the margin is on my potato chips? And I said, what, $1? It's $1.49. It's a potato chip. It's worth nothing. The packaging is worth more than the potatoes that are inside of this thing. And he says 12 cents is his margin. So it's not even paying it's not even paying the taxes which the municipality imposed on him. It's basically the fact that he's absorbing the unprofitability of this thing. So Frito-Lay or whoever makes the potato chip can absorb the margin because the consumer can't afford a $3 bag of potato chips, but the manufacturer of those potato chips wants to be assured of having capture that entire $1 of margin. It's something which I call cost push. And that's what's happening. And there's no downward adjustment in prices, even though our economy would justify a downward push on prices. Stockman talked about deflation, and he's absolutely correct from a debt point of view, but from a nuts and bolts point of view, supply and demand. There's almost infinite supply of all of the things you need to live on in our economy. There's an infinite overabundance of real estate, of healthcare, of food, all the things that you need to live. Yet the prices of these non-core items, that's what they're called. It's ironic that the things you need are called non-core and the things that you don't need are called core. But there's an overabundance of these non-core items internationally and certainly in the United States. If these things are untouchably expensive, education, healthcare, because these large bureaucracies have pushed themselves into the mix, and it's impossible for a small guy to start a business and actually compete with these companies. The only businesses that are started now are via private capital in Silicon Valley, and they blitzscale themselves into marketplaces and sectors irrespective of profitability. And that's the case of Amazon and Netflix and what have you. And in a way, Amazon's like Toys R Us. The idea with those kinds of retail places are you have to grow stores. The minute you don't, you die. And that's what all of these large institutions are doing. They're looking to grow margin, customers, dominance in sectors. And the minute they stop dying, their fake and phony accounting comes out, and the walls of the insane asylum come crashing down.
What happens if what Christine Lagarde was talking about, though? I mean, are we headed for a big, massive adjustment in this debt? That's also what Stockman was talking about. The debt's not payable. I mean, the debt is a cartoon. We're never paying this. I mean, so what happens? What happens when this thing finally comes apart? What happens to society? What is the end game?
Well, look at more at the municipal governments and look at the federal government. I mean, these municipal governments have unfunded pensions, they have bad accounting, they have large commitments, $400,000 policemen. It's all out of whack. Multi-million-dollar pensions for teachers in perpetuity. You could look in at least my neck of the woods. Every 2 miles is a school district with a $400,000 paid, or $250,000 to $400,000 paid superintendent, and so you have all these little fiefdoms. No one ever is transferred from school district to school district. Everyone's in place. And that's part of the narrowing. It's almost like serfdom, where no one can leave their little village. And that's how our economy is. It's the Soviet Union. Here's your job. This is the job for the rest of your life, and you better produce. And by the way, if you don't work so hard, we won't look in your direction. And the debt to support this is not sustainable. To me, these municipalities pile on debt because, again, there's not enough money in the underlying economy to support their commitments. And when it goes bad, you're going to be stealing someone else's savings. Debt is always someone else's savings. And that's what it works out to. And the theft is just off the hooks. You are encountering this theft every single day with every economic activity. Sending your kid to public school is a theft. Sending your old mother to the hospital is a theft. Sending them to nursing home is a theft. And that's what this economy has become. It's lost its dynamic aspects.
But could the whole thing crash, though? Could the whole thing? What happens when the whole thing crashes and they can't support it? I mean, anarchy, chaos.
Who's your guess that says it's a slow burn?
That was Catherine Ralston Fitz, but she stopped saying that. She said we're going to hit the fast burn soon.
It's possible. It's very possible. I mean, when I visited actually a communist country, people stopped obeying the laws and the customs, and simply they couldn't afford to give every guy that is at a roadblock a $20 bribe. And sooner or later, that's what hits the wall. For you and I, it will become a question of survival. I mean, when you have all of these people vying for your money, at what point do you lose the ability to have money to pay for the basic things that you need? If your food should be $50 a week, and instead it's $200 because there's only 4 food companies, what are you going to do when it goes to $300? What are you going to do? And that's the case now. Is these large bureaucracies are trying to steal margin from each other. And what's amazing to me with the millennials is they don't care if they get any value whatsoever from their dollars spent. They're more than happy to embed themselves into a cell phone that costs $2,000 a year and provides them with absolutely nothing but feedback bias. And there's actually no content on these things. So why is everyone paying for this disservice that they're getting? Why are you paying $250 a month for TV, which used to be free? Why are you giving your information to Facebook at a tremendous cost to yourself? And why are you giving your information to Facebook without even consenting to it?
Where does it?
So
go ahead.
Well, I'm so far. I'll be honest with you. I'm so far off the mark in terms of my perceptions of where we are. And that's been the case for years. But when you go back into the stuff that I've talked about, time and time again, it's hit the mark. We talked about Facebook, must have been a year ago. Talked about Turkey a decade ago. Talked about China.
You're not off the mark. You're ahead of the mark, is what you are.
But here's the thing. When everyone is so propagandized, and everyone is so comfortable, it's very hard to say, okay, well, maybe you're living, in the matrix. It's very hard to have discussions with people who are convinced that they go to the ballot box and actually participate in the economy and in the voting system. And with Facebook, people think they're actually participating in life and having their opinion is heard. And it's really just not the case. Factory workers' opinions are never heard. And that's unfortunate. And that's where we are today. They're just educated to comply with filling out FAFSA forms and these great hunts for information so they can be corralled into this little mediocrity that is getting narrower and narrower, and the pie is getting cut smaller and smaller and smaller. And for a lot of people, they'll wake up one day, their pension won't be there. They'll find out that the bureaucracy has stumbled them into a war, or they'll think about, let's say, Russia having a strategic view. What about China? Do you think China has strategic view? Well, the U.S. doesn't have a view of anything. Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah.
I mean, what happens when you don't have an overview? What happens when you don't have a sense of history? And like China, what happens when you're jingoistic about it all? When you think you're exceptional, American exceptionalism, what about Chinese exceptionalism?
How do people? What should people do? I mean, the end. So what's the end game in a synopsis here? And what should people do? You're talking about, to me in the pre-interview, getting small. Explain what the end game is, and what do you do to protect yourself, and explain.
Well, you get small. Well, you get small, but you also have to pick your battles. Let's say you're hospitalized tomorrow, and they hand you a form, and that's what they did in the Soviet Union. Here, please, you sign your confession. And this is your crime. Sign your confession, and then Beria would put you up against the wall and shoot you. So in our system, it's all done with money. So you go to the hospital, you sign a document that says you're responsible for everything. Meanwhile, the welfare patient next to you is using the hospital as a hotel because Medicaid is paying for it. And you have to write on the form, fine, I agree to pay my bill, but only for what's necessary and only to the extent of Medicare and Medicaid. So what's to stop you from changing the contract that hospital gives you? So you have to fight the bureaucracy where you can. There's a speed limit in a town nearby that was set to 20 miles an hour on a road that could support 45, 50 miles an hour because some politician decided they should do that. So ask for the engineer's report on the road. And that's a lot of effort. It's a lot of effort to fight these bureaucracies. Best not to be in the fight in the first place. And there's a lot of people, I think Peter Schiff's father was a tax protester. Look what happened to him. They threw him in jail. Or Ann Barnhart, look what happened to her. She became a non-person. These fights are just not worth having. Being a Bitcoin guy, trading around in Bitcoin, and then having a $100,000 tax bill and no profits, that's a fight you shouldn't be in. And it's a matter of just getting small, avoiding these fights with the bureaucracy, and deciding how to fight the bureaucracy, to preempt them, to confuse them. And it's something that people have to become very adept at. And in communist countries, people just ignored the bureaucracies. And we're sort of in this uncomfortable time where it's very hard to ignore bureaucracy. But no one is telling you to be on Facebook and give all your information out for free. No one is telling you that you need a cell phone and need to pay Verizon or AT&T or one of the other narrowed companies hundreds of dollars for a service that costs $1 a month in Africa. I mean, are people aware that in third world countries they don't have landlines because the cell phone service is so cheap? Are they even aware of that? So why are we paying top dollar for something that should be effectively free? The same thing with Wi-Fi. Why can't we have a mesh network, wireless, in large cities, and get rid of Verizon? Because that's Verizon's plan, is to have a 5G network with no end mile. So there's all sorts of ways around the bureaucracy, but the culture is not set up for that, and even individuals are not set up to fight the bureaucracy. They're just going to be rolled over on balance.
How else would you get small? What are some other ways to quote unquote get small?
I mean, what do you think? I mean, how would you get small?
I would stay out of debt.
Not having a website, that's one way. Yep. Staying out of debt is one way. Not applying for federal programs is another way. State programs, Medicaid, Medicare, financial aid forms, any large debt acquisition, educating your kids privately as opposed to in public, getting smaller houses, not getting credit for a new car. There's lots of ways for you to get small, and you'll be happier, I think, as a result. I mean, in the old days, millionaires used to drive beat-up station wagons. Right now, you have paupers driving BMWs.
Yeah, I've seen that.
There's absolutely no reason for it.
Yeah.
And you know, the larger you live, the bigger the target you are. And that's sort of very interesting when you look at a lot of these big ass politicians driving around like Machas. They're driving around like big shots with their license plate, state senator, senator, federal judge, whatever. In other countries, people don't do that because they would be shot in the streets. Don't you think that's a possibility? Yeah, those people should get small.
When it all unwinds, the things are going to change dramatically. What do you think? What do you think the biggest change is going to be when things really unwind?
Well, I think people just look stunned. I mean, it's the same thing, denial, and then they realize it only when it's too late. So I think everyone right now is in denial about basic things. What is your form of government? What actually is your economy? And they all harken back to the good old days into Keynes or Mises or feel-good times or it's America is great or make America great again, or also just total nonsense, total and absolute nonsense. And like a sociopath, these bureaucracies have to burn themselves out, and they're doing like an Ouroboros. It's the tail is eating, the head is eating the tail, and this great narrowing, this loop is getting smaller and smaller and smaller as it gets feeds on itself, and that's the case. This narrowing is exactly that. It's stenosis, and that's what you're seeing in your society. And the debt means as the debt service, and as interest rates rise, and I said that they're going to rise faster and farther than people anticipate. I said that on your show a while ago.
Yep.
It's a narrowing. There's less velocity of money in your economy. It's a great narrowing. So it's a large cultural problem, but that doesn't stop the rest of the world from moving forward. And the biggest group of people that are moving in some direction presently is China, and the direction, and I agree with John Xenakis, and that's where this is from. He suggested that China looks a lot like National Socialism, and that's without the scapegoating. That's true, and the scapegoating from China's perspective will be the ugly Americans that are pressing on our interests in the South China Sea, depriving us with food, which is why they're occupying the South China Sea in the first place. They're taking fishing grounds away from the Philippines, and they're taking water away from Vietnam, and they're in conflict with India, and they're controlling North Korea.
And we're probably headed for war. China is headed for a big, fat resource war, correct?
Well, I don't know if it's a resource war, but when the economy goes down, they will find a scapegoat, and that scapegoat is us. It's not them, certainly. It's not the leadership of China.
Got it.
So they'll just activate their people, and the people will run around, get angry at the ugly foreigners. It's jingoism at its best. Look up that word, jingoism. And they'll do whatever they want because, according to them, we have to dot the I's and cross the T's in international law, but they can do whatever they want. And the American public will be stunned, and they won't be unified. Even after 9/11, when those towers went down, I remember people across the country saying, oh, good, it happened to New Yorkers. I remember that. There were a whole host of people saying that. That's not the case. If you just ruffle a feather in China, the government will use the press and the people to have a scapegoat. That's us, and we'll walk right into it. So we have an economy that's non-functional, bureaucratic, labor value that's equal to zero, lies, false perceptions of where we are, and again, is very, in some respects, Trump is not wrong about a lot of things. Being able to do anything about them is where he's wrong. Thinking that he could actually, manage this beast is actually the mistake I think that he made. We're counting on people in the bureaucracy to help him in that process. A bit of magical thinking on his part, but he's sort of in a faux government anyway. Does it really matter? Does it really matter who you elect? I mean, I think with Clinton, you just would have had a realization of pain a little bit sooner.
Yeah. Yeah, oh yeah, lots of pain and FEMA camps. But anyway, I digress. Warren Pollock, thanks for coming on and tell us your views and tell us what you're thinking. And I guess the takeaway here is get small, get
Yeah.
out of debt, and keep your head down.
And pick your fights, because you're going to have them, and with these bureaucracies. But I think also realize where you are and take responsibility for it.
All right, Warren Pollock, thank you so much for joining us today. You got no website, you got nothing to sell. People comment about that at the end, and they go, "Wow, how refreshing! Somebody with no website." No, but you're a smart guy. You're, have deep Wall Street experience, deep analytic experience, geopolitical analyst and financial analyst. And thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts with us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Well, good luck to everyone.